to the river, which was necessary in pre-train days. But McLemore decided to come in and be innovative and take a train line from Memphis all the way to Little Grange. So he started in on this, and then the panic of 1835 hit him, and things went really bad, and he lost his entire fortune and was a broken man, and actually went to California in the gold rush to see if he couldn't recoup his fortune. I guess he figured he had done well once, maybe he could hit it twice. He came back here and died right after the Civil War. But it was a visionary idea. So Robert Brinkley and Robertson Topp, who were two major developers and lawyers and capitalists, back when that was a good word, decided to get the city to float a bond issue. So they did. They floated a $500,000 bond issue, which was a tremendous amount of money in those days, to build the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. And it was proposed to go from Memphis all the way out to Charleston, where you could take the cotton, where it could hit the ocean liners and go over to Britain to the cotton mills. So in fact, there was so much excitement over the railroads in the 1850s that we actually had a transcontinental railroad convention here. And interestingly enough, Jefferson Davis was the Secretary of Commerce at the time, and he determined that the best route from the East Coast to the West Coast was mysteriously through Memphis and then down all through the South. He was taking it through Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas. Unfortunately, he resigned, so there went our deal on the railroad, and so we were left with all this expensive infrastructure, and then we had a war on our hands. But at any rate, this is a wonderful photograph. This building was demolished, I think, in 1960 by urban renewal. It's up there. There's an apartment building on Marshall there at Madison and Danny Thomas. That's where the Memphis and Charleston station was. And I remember reading a news clip that said when it was demolished, it was the oldest train station in the nation. It just broke my heart. At any rate, let's see what we got here. Well, maybe we got it. Yeah, so here's the rail yard. Pretty funky. All right. And then, of course, you have the obligatory cotton warehouses on the railroad line. So cotton is king, and we're moving up to the 1860s. But unfortunately, we start having some problems. But back to Central Gardens. We now get like the first or the second really grand house over here, also in 1854, William Rowland Harris House. This house was Greek Revival with a full-height entry porch, ionic columns, a metal roof, and rear chimneys. William Rowland Harris was a very esteemed judge. Sorry, rats. Okay, in November 1853, Judge William R. Harris paid $6,000 for 40 acres of land. He was allowed to purchase this home site from the Rozelle family. They must have thought a lot of him because he was the first person outside the family that was allowed to buy any land. He was appointed to the Tennessee Supreme Court. He was a local judge also. After moving the family in, they were joined by his younger brother, Isham Green Harris, who had just lost the 1853 governor's race. So he moved here to practice law. Harris's 1857 governor's race was characterized by brawls and a debate ending in a drawn pistol. Harris won the debate and the election and moved to Nashville. Sadly enough, right after that, in June of '58, Judge Harris was coming to Memphis from New Orleans, and the steamboat exploded. You know, the average life of a steamboat on the Mississippi River was actually 18 months, and there were just horrific accidents. Mark Twain's younger brother actually was injured in a steamboat accident, and they were always scalded, which had to be awful without morphine. At any rate, poor Judge Harris was brought home and died of the injuries. The Bar Association held a big wake and funeral at his house. He had honorary pallbearers, but his widow, Eveline, was left with the property. She was a very astute businesswoman. She survived both the war and the yellow fever epidemics with all of her property intact, which was all this acreage. Plus, she had 100 acres out in the county, and she had a plantation down in Mississippi. So they're obviously very wealthy people. She began subdividing and selling her land basically to support herself, though. Governor Isham Harris actually stayed briefly at Clanlow when he was fleeing the federal forces in February of 1862 after they came to Nashville. And then, of course, Nathan Bedford Forrest was briefly in their backyard, but unfortunately they moved on, and the house was occupied by Union troops, as was Mr. Rozell's house, okay? So if you had a standing house, the Hunt Phelan, we all know that was occupied, but I was shocked that every house in Central Gardens was also occupied. So let's see what we got now. So today we know it as Clanlow. Can you believe it? This has been the subject of several renovations, including, I guess, the big colonial revival trend of the 20s when they came in and just really gussied the girl up. It has brick veneer. I think Furbringer and Jones, Marty, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think they actually did some of the additions. They changed out quite a bit. But inside that, believe it or not, folks, is that beautiful plantation home that we saw. Oh, and I love this photo. Okay, this is Isham Green Harris. He was an American politician, the governor of Tennessee, and a U.S. senator from 1877 until his death, which would have been in 97. As governor, his decision not to respond to President Abraham Lincoln's request for troops was actually the reason that Tennessee joined the Confederacy. So I guess when you're a hot-tempered Southerner, you're just going to remain one. During the Civil War, he served as staff officer at Confederate Army. Following the defeat, he fled to Mexico. What this doesn't say is he took a lot of the Confederate gold with him. He claimed it was $7,000. They claimed it was $100,000. I don't know. But he returned to Memphis after learning that amnesty he wasn't going to be prosecuted for treason. He subsequently was elected to the U.S. Senate and served as president pro tem. So go figure, folks. But he actually was an early resident of Central Gardens. I'm sorry, this is such a gorgeous photograph of Annisdale. I just have to put it in, okay? It's the great sweep of the driveway there. The trees are not hiding the house. It's quite beautiful. Sorry, whoops. Well, all right, how do I make it go back now? Let's see if I can. All right, here we go. So this is the Mansfield-Snowden House, or today known as Annisdale, 1856. Actually, Dr. Mansfield was, I believe, from Massachusetts or Connecticut. He was a pharmacist back when being a pharmacist meant that you could make patent medicine, and there was really no FDA to tell you that you couldn't put cocaine in it. So this is a house that patent medicine built. He moved here and bought this property from Rozell. It was a beautiful hill overlooking Lamar, which was a major thoroughfare in those days. He lived there until after the Civil War. He lived there for about 10 years. And then the home was sold. Robert Brinkley bought it for his daughter, Anne Brinkley, who had married Robert Snowden in Nashville and moved back down to Memphis. She'd gone up there as an infant after her mother passed away. So the family still occupies the house today, but it is another, and actually this is an antebellum house, so 3, we got one more coming up. Let's see if we got it here. Okay, so, okay. So this is Central Gardens in 1890. I just wanted to show you how big this had gotten. You know, well, okay. This is one of the institutions of Central Gardens. It is Grace Church. Today it has combined with Grace St. Luke's, but originally Grace Church was on Vance Avenue, located, I believe, at Lauderdale and Vance. And this actually grew up in the town of South Memphis when Robertson Topp founded his rival town of the city of Memphis in 1846, and it was annexed by the city in 1850. The congregation stayed here until I guess the Depression, and then the city came in and started doing condemnation and urban renewal, and basically the congregation decided to move out of the neighborhood, but they left I guess a satellite church there. And then the Mount Nebo Missionary Baptist Church congregation was had lost their church. They were an African American congregation that was located in South Memphis, and they were being thrown out of their church also. So they bought this church, and they're here today. This is McLean Boulevard, about 1900. You know, paving is a wonderful thing in many ways, but this is very picturesque as long as you don't have to drive your car down it. This is our fourth antebellum house. This, believe it or not, is a circa 1850 house. This is Judge J.P. Young. The address is 532 South McLean. And this house actually began life as a center hall, antebellum, one-story Greek Revival house. Judge J.P. Young lived here, and Judge J.P. Young rode with rode with Nathan Bedford Forrest. Idlewild was kind of a hotbed of former Confederates as far as I can tell. And then he became a notary back when being a notary meant something. So this home, he built another home up on Peabody, which was a very elegant early 20th century home that was demolished by the library to put in the parking lot over there. But be that as it may, so Judge Young's home, the Youngs arrived in Memphis in the 1840s. His father originally owned all the property from Union, McLean, Barksdale, down to Central. And they were related to the Barksdales. They were all kith and kin, as it were. So after this house was sold, it went to a gentleman that was trying to move his family in here. He also railed with Forrest and had I think they were the Pages, and they had. He had a large insurance company, and he got mad because construction code, even back then, would not let him put a second story on this house. So he got really mad, and just construction stopped. And his daughter, who was an adult and who was actually expecting her second child, came up and said, "Daddy," and I've read this woman's letters. They were just really very touching. She said, "Daddy, why don't we move the house over to the side of the lot and turn it sideways, and my husband and I will live here next to you and Mama, and you'll have the grandchildren, and then you can build a new house next door." So her father thought that was a pretty darn good idea. So the house next door, and sorry I don't have a photo of it, it's two-story and brick. So they covered this kind of with, like, I don't know, brick veneer, and put it sort of a little Victorian feel to it. But if you go over the side of the house over here, there's this really very odd bay window. And if you go inside, sure enough, it's the center hall, and it's running the opposite way. So Judge J.P. Young was quite a character. Maybe we'll find out. Yes, he was a historian. He wrote the Standard History of Memphis. And this is a map that he did with the Southside High School history and geography and graphic arts departments or whatever. And this is his idea of the chronology of the history of Memphis. He only goes up to the Confederacy. He never puts an American flag on here. It's a pretty unusual document. If you want to see the original, it's over at the Mississippi Valley Collection. But he has the river, he has the Indians, we have an arrowhead. We have the marriage of the Atlantic and the Mississippi. That was the big moment for the train when they actually shot water into the river out of a cannon. Very symbolic there. And then it's the edges are like this wonderful Art Deco. There's trains and boats and planes. It's very interesting. And then because he did ride with Nathan Bedford Forrest, he actually has a little Ku Klux Klanman on here. It's all It's a very interesting map, and he lived to be very, he died a very elderly gentleman. But the other thing that he did, besides drawing maps, was his family, he specifically, and his father before him, helped found Idlewild Presbyterian Church. And this map that I found actually shows you every place that Idlewild Presbyterian Church was before it ended up in its current location over on Union Avenue. So it was a small white frame church. I think it was kind of in the area where maybe the library was. And then around the turn of the 20th century, the congregation, these people actually went out to a Presbyterian church on Park Avenue, but they had to pay a nickel to ride the trolley. And if you had children, it could be 25 or 30 cents. And it was twice on Sunday. And if you had to go to any other church events, it became expensive. And if you missed the trolley, you had to wait an hour. So they decided, first they started having Sunday school in the house in the area over here in Central Gardens, and then they decided to build a church. So the church was doing very well. So not many people know this, but this is the 1907 Idlewild Presbyterian Church at McLean and Union with Jones and Furbringer as architects. I know why they got the contract, not that it isn't a beautiful church, but Mr. Furbringer was a deacon in the church. And this is where Walgreens is today, folks. Quite heartbreaking, isn't it? So at any rate, that's the 1907, and then they built the current sanctuary that they have over on Union a few decades after that. So that's another institution. And then I guess we're now moving out. We've passed the Civil War. All the veterans are dead. And I thought we'd look a little bit at the 19th century architecture of Idlewild. Now, when you drive around in Central Gardens, you'll see these beautiful homes from the 20s and the teens, and then there will be some modest little stick house, or there'll be a shotgun, and you're like, where did that come from? Now, I want you to know that I spent hours looking through plat maps. I've literally looked through half the plat maps that were ever pulled in the city of Memphis. And in the 19th century, folks, they just didn't do plat maps. So I was not able to get the plats and find out a lot about the developers of this area. But this is over right around Idlewild School. This, I guess, might be Harvard or Vinton. And at any rate, Linden, thank you. All right. It's a street. Okay. Maybe it's two streets. Okay, so little town of Idlewild. It was incorporated with boundaries that included Mosby on the west, Poplar and Madison on the north, Tucker Street and Cooper Street on the east, and Harbert Street on the south. In September of 1895, there was actually a whole series of these little mini towns. There was Madison Heights, and then there was Idlewild, and then there was the town of Lenox. And I was reading the rules on the town of Idlewild, and if you were idle, they would just arrest you. So I'm like, I'm out of there. But they were very interesting. They stayed around about 10 years. The town of Lenox, their big civic project was to build Lenox School. So they were all annexed by the city pretty early on. But at one time, so this is McLean again. This is looking from Judge J.P. Young's front porch, folks. This is McLean. And Peabody used to be called Appeal. And is that the 19th Century Club? It might be, or the building next to it there. So, Beethoven, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, the 19th century is on Union. And then this is a wonderful shot of Union Avenue. Those were the days. No global warming there, folks. All right, let's see what we got next. Whoops. Okay, this is the only plat I was able to find, and interestingly enough, this is the 1889 Roselle subdivision, and I think it was done by A.B. Roselle. I assume that Mr. Roselle named his son A.B. in honor of A.B. Carr in gratitude for getting 800 acres for $8,000. So at any rate, this central, here's the railroad line, and I think this might be Central. A couple of funky streets in here. But actually, this remains today, folks. Here it is. The Roselle subdivision, Roland and York, south of Central. And Roland is named for Judge William Rowland Harris. And actually those are all quite 19th century, quite wonderful, so very in character, so that's a little subdivision. And then actually going down York, there's a couple of more 19th century houses in there. I tried to get the shot of the Central Gardens sign there. I don't know, it was kind of a dark day. Linden Avenue, Victorian, I really like this. This was so pretty, I just had to take a photo. I think the roof might be new, but that's quite sweet. So we got our Victoria. And then we've got gable front cottages all the way up to Queen Anne houses. This is over on Central. There was development going on by the 1880s. People had started platting that. And in the next, the rest of the series, you're going to hear about some of the wonderful 20th century houses that have been developed over there. But this is the roots of the neighborhood. Whoops. And then this is a really, really wonderful house here. This is American shingle style. I really like this. And then this is a house on McLean that I really like. And John Griffin or anyone, I wondered if that was maybe Greek revival. And
seriously altered. Huge porches that were torn off.
Oh, okay.
All the way around it, it was way different.
Oh, very sad. And other folks in the audience might have their favorite 19th century house. You might be
actually. The Roselle house you started with was also seriously altered. It had a huge porch.
Oh, okay. But that wouldn't have really been, would that have been, then that's why it looks so denuded in the front. Okay, thank you. All right. I could not find a historic shot of that. And then last but not least, we have the R. Brinkley Snowden House, Ashlar Hall, 1896. This is a son of the Snowdens who fancied himself an architect, who went to Europe and became, I guess, permanently enamored with ashlar cut stone. And as you can see it here, it's quite handsome. When I should have brought my Mongo photo in so we could compare, but at one time there were not high rises on either side, and it was quite lovely. And actually his brother also had a lovely home where the Coach and Four stood. So the Snowdens were important in the development of the area, and you'll hear more about them and the early 20th century developments in the weeks to come. That pretty much concludes my, my early trip through Central Gardens. If there's any questions or comments?
Very good.
All right, thank you.